It was a journey to a foreign world. A world of untouched, majestic nature. In the spring of the year 1833, an encounter with a people shrouded in legend. Deep inside North America, a unique world for thousands of years. Eventually, however, it is discovered by the white man. In 1833, a steamer arrives, carrying Prince Maximilian of Wied and the painter Karl Bodmer. They do not come as conquerors. Instead, they hope to study the Native Americans and their culture. Their journey gave rise to a myth and the legendary fictional figure, Winnetou. This is what it may have looked like in 1875. A con man is released from prison and decides to start a new life as a writer. Karl May hopes to write adventure stories and seeks out inspiration. He has never visited the Wild West, but in his fantasies, America allows the aspiring writer to become the heroic old Shatterhand and embark on a journey to see a noble chief, his blood brother, Winnetou. The seeds of this story lie in the Linden Museum in Stuttgart, Germany. Its most valuable exhibit is a bison robe hand-painted by Chief Matatope. The Native American chief presented it to Prince Maximilian of Wied as a farewell gift at the end of the prince's expedition to North America 180 years ago.
The illustrations on his cloak represent his heroic deeds as leader of the Mandan warriors. It provides a historic record of his greatest victories and achievements. The pictures are detailed representations of the battles in which he demonstrated his leadership skills as a warrior and as a leader of his tribe.
Matatope's battle with the chief of the Cheyenne tribe is the stuff of legend. Despite being injured, he won the knife fight. These images were designed to drive fear into the hearts of his enemies.
It was important to him to be remembered like this, and he succeeded. He practically made himself immortal.
These two fictional characters helped to cement his reputation, Winnetou and Old Shatterhand. Their story begins in Germany's Neuwied on the Rhine in 1832. Neuwied is a principality with a proud tradition stretching back hundreds of years. Neuwied's ruling count has 9 siblings. The third youngest is Prince Maximilian, who is 51 at the time. He hopes to explore the world, like his role model, Alexander von Humboldt. In his apartment near the castle, the prince hatches a bold plan, an expedition to the Native Americans of North America. The expedition is to be documented by Karl Bodmer, a young, talented artist from Zurich. The prince pays him a modest fee. Their journey to America takes a year. And on the 10th of April, 1833, they finally begin their expedition up the Missouri River. The explorers travel on a steamboat used by the American Fur Company to trade with the Native Americans. The ship represents a technical revolution and has only been in operation for a year. Life on board is comfortable for the 100 travelers. Bodmer has time to paint, while Maximilian writes.
In this work, I will attempt to guide the reader's eye to those wide prairies where the tribes of the natives still enjoy a peaceful existence, while their brothers on the eastern side of the continent are driven out by immigration and have, for the most part, been vanquished. Mr. Bodmer has portrayed the Indian nations with great truthfulness. These images could make an important contribution to the knowledge and understanding of this tribe. In addition, I can highly recommend the landscapes produced by this exceptional young artist.
6 weeks later, the Yellowstone reaches the territory of the Dakota people, members of the Sioux tribe.
The Dakota of Missouri are nomads and hunters who live in leather tents during their journeys. The tents are high cones made with strong poles that are covered with a layer of bison fur.
A Dakota settlement 180 years ago, through the eyes of Karl Bodmer. And today, Poplar, the capital of the Fort Peck Indian Reservation. Everyday life is determined by poverty and rootlessness, as it is throughout the world of today's Native Americans. This weekend, however, the reservation's inhabitants are celebrating their powwow. Their annual ceremony celebrates their tribe's spiritual strength and pride in their history. The world that Prince Maximilian described is immediately recognizable.
We heard the drums of the Native Americans. Shortly thereafter, the entire community arrived, colorful and dressed in their best, accompanied by a crowd of spectators.
Powwows used to be the gatherings of a tribe's warriors. Now, Native Americans from near and far congregate to sing, dance, and celebrate their community and their cultural roots. The people here say that maintaining traditions is an essential part of a good life. Karl May, the creator of the fictional hero Winnetou, never actually encountered Native Americans in the Wild West, although he claimed that he did. More than 40 years after Prince Maximilian's expedition, Karl May's stories were born of May's own journey through the world of books.
The slow, strange dance began. The dance was made even more bizarre because the men had hung all kinds of incredible and occasionally grotesque objects from their bodies. The dance was accompanied by monotonous singing.
Terry Martinez is the master of ceremonies for the dances. His Native American name is Matro Anglais, or bearskin. Terry is a 7th-generation direct descendant of the legendary chief Sitting Bull, who won the Battle of Little Bighorn.
The ceremonial stick that you see here is a society stick from the White Crow society from the Hunkpapa of Sitting Bull with the Blackfeet tribe, last of the 5 tribes. The blue on my ceremonial stick represents the sky. The green are the Mother Earth. The yellow, the 4 yellows are the sun. The red is the red road that we walk on. The fan comes from the eagle and the mirrors to reflect off anything should come at me in a negative way, which rarely you see. Indians always show respect and do things in a positive way.
The respectful, positive Native Americans are particularly accommodating towards the painter Karl Bodmer. Prince Maximilian notes in his diary that Chief Wakta Gali, the great warrior, seems to enjoy modeling from Mr. Bodmer.
I think they also both had maybe something in their hearts that reached out to something in the native heart. Our Lakota people call this Lakol Kichiapi. There's something that's within us that is the affectionate way. And I see that in their works. I see that in their recordings.
Dakota Goodhouse is a professor of Native American history and one of the last of his tribe to decorate bison skins. This is the original art form of his people, the Lakota Sioux.
There are different ways of painting buffalo robes. There's a feminine way, the way women paint bison robes. They paint with abstract geometrical forms and figures and shapes. But men, as you'll see on this robe, men paint with images, pictures, pictographs. And I think that it had to be that way, because if a Mandan painted his exploits, and if a Lakota Sioux Indian came and saw that, the Lakota would know right away what the story is about. So I like to also think of it as a man's language.
The final evening of the Poplar Powwow. There are prizes for their participants in a wide range of categories. The prizes have a total value of almost $25,000 and are provided by the reservation's inhabitants.
As First Nations people, we don't have much, but we're taught what little we have, we'll share it, eh? And so in that way, we're exercising these virtues that need work on every day: compassion, empathy, loving, caring, sharing, all these things. And one of the things you'll see most at a powwow is that virtue of generosity. Why, sure, and what that means is, it's hard to be an Indian, but I love my Indian ways. Eh?
We leave Dakota Territory and travel further up the Missouri, following in Prince Maximilian's steps. "180 years ago, this is a perilous journey. The wild, untamed river is still largely unknown to the crew of the Yellowstone, and danger lurks below the surface.
The 19th of April, the ship was still stranded on a sandbank, and they attempted to lighten it by unloading the cargo onto the raft. Mr. Bodmer produced a very clear depiction of the scene. We saw our first bison on the 18th of May. Several hunters were immediately dispatched onto land. They ruthlessly mowed down the noble animals for their own pleasure, with little intention of making the slightest use of them. "30 million bison once roamed North America. By 1902, there were just 23 animals left in the wild. The rest had been massacred by those who call themselves pioneers. This tragedy also affected Karl May deeply.
The red man protected the wild because it provided food. The white man, on the other hand, raged like a predator that kills just to spill blood. How long will it be until there are no more buffalo and no more Indians? God forbid.
After 3,000 kilometers and 75 days on the river, the Yellowstone reaches its destination on the 24th of June, 1833. Fort Union, the most important center of the fur trade along the Missouri at the time.
When Prince Maximilian and Bodmer arrived here, a gun salute would have fired to honor their arrival. So amazing. It was like the big Christmas of everything here. They only came up once a year, so it was the highlight of the fort.
Karl Bodmer preserved the moment for posterity.
Ich denke, Maximilian zu Wied
I think Maximilian of Wied confounded the expectations that people had of someone in his elevated position and of a man who was actually a prince. The Native Americans were particularly surprised. Faced with a visit from royalty, they put on their finest clothes and feathered headdresses in order to impress their important guest. They could not understand how this person, who appeared before them in his oldest clothes, could hold any kind of status or power. However, this did not bother him, as Maximilian wasn't as vain as he might appear, or his position might suggest. He was a man of science, and science doesn't require ermine robes.
Karl May gave his creation and alter ego, Old Shatterhand, a different appearance altogether. This was also used on publicity materials.
Old Shatterhand looked as clean and well-dressed as if he'd only set off for the west the day before. His rifle gleamed as though the gunsmith had just handed it to him an hour ago. His boots were pristine, the spurs without a trace of rust. Indeed, he had even washed his hands.
In Fort Union, Maximilian of Wied notes, the hosts treated their esteemed visitors with the utmost hospitality.
We had fresh or dried bison meat every day. We never lacked for bread made with flour, coffee, or wine. We lived in accordance with what this remote area had to offer.
Today, Fort Union is a national monument and is to be preserved much as it was when Karl Bodmer painted it in the 19th century. At the time of the Germans' visit, up to 5,000 Native Americans traded with the white merchants. These encounters were not only positive, as Maximilian noted.
Spirits are the most effective encouragement for the Native Americans and all North Americans to part with everything they own or wear about their person.
Lauren Yellowbird's ancestors included medicine men and chiefs. His knowledge of Native American culture and history took him to Hollywood, where he acted as advisor for the Oscar-winning movie The Revenant, which is set here. The reception was the heart of the facility and the trading area. As Prince Maximilian recorded, 50,000 bison furs were traded here every year, a $5 million industry in today's terms.
This is where the chief, the leaders would have been brought in. Then they would negotiate for the furs, the buffalo robes, the beaver pelts, all the furs that they were bringing for the trade goods here, the blankets, the cloth, the tinware, the knives, all that type of stuff. So the exchange was huge here. So at some point then a pipe was brought out. So each person would smoke this pipe. They'd pray, they'd offer it to you. And they'd do the whole thing. It was very ceremonial. They would do it right in here.
Old Shatterhand invariably smoked a peace pipe.
I frequently had to smoke the peace pipe, and I was always aware of the gravity and the dignity of the process. With my left hand, I made a gesture of devotion and inhaled, before blowing the smoke into the heavens and towards the earth.
The next stage of the journey begins.
At 7 in the morning on the 6th of July, both sides signaled farewell with a series of cannon shots. Our people hoisted the Flora's sails.
The keelboat marks a departure from the more luxurious, civilized methods of travel previously enjoyed by the travelers. The General Ashley is an exact replica of the traditional method of transport along the Missouri River. Once a year, a group of so-called mountain men meet on the General Ashley.
Let him on it. Just keep him about mid-channel, about this line. Good line. Watch
Bill, it's kind of like when you're drinking, just pick the middle.
These Americans intend to experience the life of the pioneers who once conquered the country. For a week, they leave all modern conveniences behind to pursue an experience that is authentic down to the last detail. The group only lands at places that remain entirely untouched by modern life. Mike Nottingham, the leader of these time travelers, and his group live precisely the way they would have in 1833 when the German prince came through here.
My crew and I have just taken Maximilian and Bodmer to Fort McKenzie upriver about 40 miles. And we're returning to Fort Union because we have to pick up some trade goods to take back upriver. That boat will be loaded with buffalo robes. In fact, we just had a herd of bison upriver before, and so we resupplied with some of our fresh meat.
An exploration of the surroundings accompanied by armed men. However, the adventure they so desperately seek was taken from them by their ancestors. The buffalo have vanished, and the Native Americans have been vanquished and driven out. There is no sign of Winnetou or his brethren.
We strained our eyes, but couldn't see anything. And yet Winnetou himself informed me that the Indians had been watching us from behind a rock, not more than 50 steps away. It is simply not enough to have great eyesight. You also have to know what you're looking for.
The group sets up camp, much as Prince Maximilian and his companions did so many years ago.
Mr. Bodmer drew a picture of our conversation as we sat around the fire smoking pipes, while wolves sang us a nighttime song.
The mountain men return from their patrol.
Most of the men around here, most of the people involved in what we do, know about Maximilian and Bodmer, unlike most Europeans. So it's probably kind of strange you come way out west here and find people like us that know about these two individuals that you're doing a documentary on.
And we often landed in vain to add to our stock of provisions.
Every evening, passages from Maximilian's diary are read aloud.
Till near 9 o'clock. The evening was warm and pleasant. We often heard the noise made by the buffaloes crossing the river.
Karl Bodmer's pictures are also passed around. Here, they're not documents of the past, but rather instructions for the present.
If I had my druthers, I would go back 170. There's not a man amongst us, given the chance, wouldn't go back to the early 19th century. And it's the love and the passion that we have for this lifestyle is why we do what we do.
Karl May would have given anything to be one of them, a man of the West. A man, as he wrote so passionately, who braves danger, a free man with a rifle in his hands. May goes so far as to have his photo taken as his fantasy Western hero. He lived the dream that millions of readers would eventually share with him. Maximilian spends almost a month traveling up the Missouri River on the keelboat.
After midday, we passed a strange spot where the Missouri appears to pass through a portal as it rounds a coarse, towering pinnacle of rock. The merchants have given it the name Citadel Rock.
On the 9th of August 1833, Maximilian of Wied and Karl Bodmer reach Fort Mackenzie, the last remote trading post before the Rocky Mountains. No trace remains of the old fort. This is merely a reconstruction. This is to be the starting point for the last leg of the expedition, the journey into the mysterious, majestic mountains.
Some distance away, we were able to see the first ranges of the Rocky Mountains. We had an incredible view of the valley. We saw 3 or 4 Indian tents, as well as several Indians caring for their horses.
Soon, however, the travelers are forced to question whether the trip is possible. Maximilian notes that tempers are frayed. The fort is surrounded by hundreds of tents, but only the Blackfoot tribe are well disposed towards the white people. It's an explosive situation.
At dawn on the 28th of August, we were woken by the sound of rifle fire. We immediately leapt up and loaded our own hunting carbines. Shots were fired from above. From up there, we could see the entire prairie covered with Indians on horseback, shooting at the fort.
When describing scenes like this, friends of Karl May relate how the author in remote Saxony would actively transform into his hero, Old Shatterhand.
From behind the fence, I fired one shot after another from my Henry rifle. I made an effort not to kill the enemies, but merely to incapacitate them.
However, this was the reality, as painted by Karl Bodmer and described by Maximilian.
The attackers had torn the Blackfoot tents to shreds with knives. The inhabitants woke suddenly and were shot dead or injured. The situation in the fort itself was chaotic. Injured Indians, men, women, and children, had been laid against the walls. An old man had been shot in the knee, and a woman used a folding knife to cut the bullet out. The man displayed absolutely no sign of his pain. We did our best to assist the wounded, passing out ointment and bandages.
After the battle, Maximilian is forced to make a difficult decision.
Undoubtedly, our scalps would be prized acquisitions for the enemy, so I was unfortunately forced to abandon my plan to continue further along up the Missouri. I requested a craft for the return journey.
The failure of his plans finally provides Maximilian with the inner peace that will make his work so significant.
The next morning, we traveled rapidly through the stone walls. There is no area that compares to it along the entire Missouri, and we never left the natural cover. Magical white castles rose up, one after another. For long stretches, they looked like a fortress that had been destroyed. The Baroque shapes increased in number. Gorges cut them into cubist figures, increasing the resemblance to works of art. These wondrous, dreamlike forms would have vanished from memory had not the skilled hand of the artist known to preserve them from being forgotten.
Karl Bodmer immerses himself in romantic landscape paintings, the most popular subject for artists at the time.
The people laid their oars down and allowed the craft to drift. The great wild nature that surrounded us was completely silent. No one spoke a word. It was as though we had all been moved to deep thoughts by the sights we were witnessing.
On the 8th of November 1833, Wied and Bodmer reached the village of Kush in the territory of the Mandan tribe. The village has vanished, and yet indentations in the ground above the old riverbed show where the earthen huts of the Mandan once stood. The archaeologist Eric Holland has spent 9 years investigating the area, living in a mobile home, and even getting married here.
When they got here, there was a town of about 1,500 Mandan people. They lived in earth lodges or round houses. They're 25 to 45 feet in diameter, wooden posts covered with earth. A family of 12 to 20 people, extended family, would live together in a house. And this town might be 15 or 1,800 people, house, very close together, inside a fortified wall, so that they could keep their horses protected, keep their corn safe from nomadic people that would be in the area as well.
The Onaslant village is a partial reconstruction of a Mandan village at its original location, made possible in part thanks to the descriptions provided by Bodmer and Prince Maximilian.
The interiors of the earth lodges are something that we see very seldom. And so by having Bodmer and Maximilian spend time in Kush and draw the interiors of the lodges, we can see that this is a warm, friendly, accommodating place.
This painting by Karl Bodmer is the only visual record of life inside the Mandan earthen huts.
First thing that would happen when you come in, you would be invited to sit down and have a bowl of soup. That was always the tradition.
The ingredients for the soup were picked in the local vegetable garden. Today, this garden is the location for Bernardine Young Bird's class on healthy, traditional food. Like their ancestors, women like Bernardine assume a lot of responsibility within their tribe.
The role of the women was not only to care for the people, but also the earth lodges you saw earlier here, those were built by the women. So those were also a part of the women's role and responsibility was to have a home for their families. And they took care of those, and it was the ownership at that time for the homes, the earth lodges, was the women. They built it, it was theirs.
Maximilian makes no mention of this aspect of Native American society. His view of women is shaped by the society he comes from.
And our societies are built on the women. Our clans go through the women, in contrast to European culture, where it's the male. You know, you want to have sons, Europeans. For us, we want to have daughters, because the line continues through the daughters.
Prince Maximilian of Wied and Karl Bodmer are guests in the all-male world of Fort Clark. In the adjacent tribal village, the Mandan men are responsible for outdoor tasks.
The Mandan leadership would come down to the fort both to trade, but also to visit with Maximilian and spend time with him in his cabin, so Bodmer could paint them in fine regalia, could describe what was on the buffalo hides that they had, all of those sorts of things that we see that are left in the historic record were done either in the cabin or plein air in the village.
Here, at the end of November, the sudden, brutal onset of winter can cause the temperature to drop as low as 40 degrees Celsius below zero. Prince Maximilian and Bodmer are trapped here for months. The two explorers spend every day documenting the lives of the indigenous people along the Missouri River. The painter will later say of his experiences with the Mandan and their neighbors, The Indians were my friends. One particular guest visits regularly from the frozen village, the tribe's chief. Although he's still a young man, he's renowned among the Native Americans in the region.
Mr. Bodmer also painted Chief Matatope in his finest clothes. Like all Native Americans, he is vain and needs more time to prepare himself than the most elegant of the Parisian ladies.
This image is the result, the quintessential likeness of a Native American chief.
The attention he received was a great honor for him. Prince Maximilian described how he posed patiently for the portrait, because it was important to him. The Native American chief wanted it to be as accurate as possible, and this was also important to the prince. Maximilian frequently reminded Bodmer to make his representations as accurate as possible.
Matatope even allows a second portrait of himself to be made, showing him as a warrior in full war paint.
Today, he returned from an expedition and proudly informed us that he had listed all his great achievements and that nobody could match him. The man was often spoken about, as he was a man of exemplary character. He provided me with the very detailed reports on his own tribe and on the neighboring Indian nations. He also greatly enjoyed passing on the words of the Mandan.
I believe the relationship between Maximilian and the chief was a very interesting one. Much of what we now know is due to Matatope. He was an important source of knowledge and information for the prince, who was aware of the chief's status and the respect his people had for him. These characteristics probably also inspired Karl May's fictional Winnetou character.
I believed that he was a good person and that he must have exceptional talents. Winnetou, who had performed more brave acts at his young age than 5 older hunters had managed in all their lives.
Winnetou.
His name will one day be famous to the ends of the plains.
The very real world of the fictional Winnetou today. The last Mandan who still spoke the language of Chief Matatope lived on the prairie of North Dakota. Dr. Edwin Benson lived to the age of 85. We were fortunate to meet him before his death, thanks to Indrek Park. The Estonian linguist came here to document the language of the Mandan. Accompanied by his colleague Elijah Benson, one of Edwin's nephews, Park visited the old man at home almost every day. There are only approximately 200 members of the tribe left, but the Mandan are financing the project. Can the language and culture of this small tribe be preserved?
Anybody can learn it. You can learn any Mandan language anytime, and speak it too, But you have to use it every day, It's not just when you feel like it or remember. Yeah, you can speak it, learn it, and speak it. But it has to be used at home at all the time, Otherwise, it's not going to work.
Indrek has lived and worked on the Fort Berthold Reservation in North Dakota for 2 years. He's an expert on Native American languages and contributed to getting Prince Maximilian's handwritten diaries published.
The depictions that Prince Maximilian and Karl Bodmer left us are absolutely invaluable. And of course, it's not just important for researchers, or biologists, anthropologists, linguists, but also for the tribes here who have inherited all this culture. For them, it's a really awesome depiction of their ancestors in really great detail. Not just the pictures, but they left behind a lot of linguistic detail. So the vocabulary lists, grammatical sketches. So it has helped to bring back to active memory several terms that otherwise may have just been forgotten. So these early diaries serve as fantastic prompts to bring back this latent knowledge and things that people haven't talked for maybe half a century or longer.
The elementary school in the Mandan village Twin Buttes. Every morning before class, the Estonian linguist provides extracurricular lessons.
Good job, everybody.
A basic Mandan language course.
All right. And how do we say to a woman?
It is hoped that this seed will ensure that more remains of Matatope than merely a collection of objects in a museum in Stuttgart.
And you say what? Omni? Omni hanitosh.
The Fort Berthold Indian Reservation lies at the heart of North Dakota's Badlands. The sparse beauty of the landscape attracts photographers and tourists. It's an inhospitable place, but not for the three affiliated tribes, Hidatsa, Mandan, and Arikara. As farmers and hunters, they originally settled along the fertile banks of the Missouri. Since 1890, they've been forced to share a tiny reservation. The tragedy of America's indigenous peoples also affected the author from Radebeul in Saxony.
I crossed the Mississippi repeatedly in order to acquaint myself with the areas where unrelenting civilization was gearing up to deliver the final fatal blow to the last of my red brothers. Wasn't the entire country the property of the red men? It was taken from them.
Footage of the tiny piece of land they were left with, the Fort Berthold Reservation in 1950. The old earthen huts were replaced by cabins, but the tribe still hoped to survive along the banks of their river. The white man had even signed a contract guaranteeing it. But in 1952, the US government decided to build a dam here. The Indians, their homes, their burial grounds, and their sacred places all vanished when the bulldozers came. The trauma remains to this day. 20% of the reservation was washed away by the creation of the Garrison Dam. Jason Morset of the Arikara tribe grew up here and only knows the land as it is now. However, the grief for everything that was lost spans generations.
And you look at it today, we're the first generation now. I've never got to see my father's home. I never got to see how my grandpa got to live. We never got that opportunity today. Everything you see now is underwater where our homelands were. 356,000 acres of agricultural land destroyed by this water.
Jason takes us across the bridge that spans the reservoir to Newtown, the capital of the reservation belonging to the three affiliated tribes.
This is my home. I don't even want to live around here sometimes because I see what's going on here. The drugs, the alcohol. And I've seen what it is still doing to our people, to my family. It hurts to see.
The glorious name of Matatope, Four Bears in English, now adorns the buildings of the area's largest employer, the Four Bears Casino and Lodge. A federal law passed in 1988 allows America's indigenous peoples to finance their reservation with the proceeds of gambling. Some of the income from the casino was used to build Newtown's earth lodges, designed to introduce visitors to Native American culture. However, few visitors make their way here, and Jason and his friends have turned it into a place to play music in peace. Moments like this prove that the world that Karl Bodmer recorded has not vanished entirely. Yet. Traveling through the Fort Berthold Reservation, the home of the 3 affiliated tribes. Jason wants us to see the beauty and vastness of the prairie and experience it as the explorers almost 200 years ago did. Their home is now, once again, endangered. Jason's reservation sits atop Bakken, an oil field larger than France. The oil is extracted using fracking, a process by which water and chemicals are used to drive oil out of deep rock formations. The extraction began in earnest a decade ago, and the Bakken Formation now produces 1 million barrels of oil a day, enough to fill 15 trains with 100 wagons each. The area's Native Americans fear that, eventually, all that will remain is a barren, polluted landscape, empty of wild animals.
You breathe in that air, you're gonna feel life, fresh oxygen. But you're also gonna look at the pollutants in the surrounding areas. You got the oil. Now we're doing with oil. Back then they fought for pelts, land, everything. Now we're fighting for our right to live. Because once that oil gets into that water, we're done. Simple as that.
The 3 tribes have made a stand against the ongoing destruction of their land. A generation ago, they reintroduced bison from a national park to the reservation. There are now hundreds of animals. The tribes are proud of this comeback and see it as a sign.
Together, we were one. There were millions of us together. We can relate to the same history. Slaughtered by the non-native, I would tell you. We depended on them for food, for clothing, for water, for life, warmth. We used everything. Always a spiritual relationship. You use that skull to pray with as a symbol of the Creator, because we are one. Today, we take care of them like they took care of us. That's about the best that I can describe to you what this buffalo means to us.
March 1834. The ice breaks on the Missouri, and Prince Maximilian embarks on the last chapter of his travel diary.
In my work, I have made an effort to provide vivid descriptions of the strange country, its coarse nature, and its native population. Observing these people is undoubtedly of the greatest interest to foreign travelers, particularly because a majority of the so-called Americans look down on them with a certain hatred.
In Europe, Prince Maximilian's book, travels in the interior of North America inspires readers, allowing them to participate in a world destined to become the stuff of legend.
As a Native American, as someone who practices these traditions, I think what they both did is that some of our collective American Indian culture and history has been preserved. Now, in English, when I say that word preserved, I think Americans tend to think, oh, it's saved. But a Dakota Lakota person, they're going to see it's saved for us to use it now. And I think that their work has done a lot to save that for us now, 160 some years later.
At noon on the 18th of April, the cargo was loaded onto the ship. Matatope shook all of our hands goodbye, and, accompanied by the fort's inhabitants, we took our places. In the fort, several cannon shots rang out to wish us farewell.
And one final farewell.
Winnetou will be filled with joy if his white brother returns soon.
I promise you this, my dear brother Winnetou. May Manitou guide all your steps and protect you. How? I watched my Winnetou go until he vanished into the mists.
In July of 1837, the noble chief Matatope died at the age of 40 from smallpox, a disease that claimed 90% of his tribe. His memory, and that of the world he inhabited, lives on thanks to the expedition of a prince and a painter, and the fictional world created by a German writer.